Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we are doing a couple of days in advance of this pod. That's all I'm going to say. Joining me from California, Northern California, Tim Bontemps.
Hello, everybody.
Joining from Dallas, Texas, one of the Metroplex's finest, Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Hey, we're all wearing the same shirts that we had on for the last podcast. What a coincidence.
In a related story, it's a holiday weekend coming up. Okay. We are going to talk about how am I framing this? I mean, like
the tiers of the Eastern Conference.
All right. The tiers of the Eastern Conference.
Nobody's crying yet.
We're just trying to take just trying to take a look at how we view the league, do the East on one pod and the West on another pod, and try to see where we think teams stack up with each other. That's all.
All right, we'll start at the top, which I think it's pretty obvious that the team in Tier A or Tier 1 plays in Boston, Massachusetts, Bontemps.
I don't think there's any question. There should be one team by itself, the one team that won over 60 games last year, the one team that had one of the best winning percentages in NBA playoff history en route to winning a record-setting 18th NBA title, team that's head and shoulders above everybody until proven otherwise in the East, even with Kristaps Porzingis missing the first couple months of the season. And I thought it was interesting. Jason Tatum did some media stuff after the Olympics and said, look, we got to come back and enjoy ring night and then move on to the next day and not have any of the championship stuff linger. And I think it's interesting. You often see teams that win a title come back and they got a lot of pressure on them to defend. And there's obviously always pressure in Boston to win. But for this group that's waited so long and fought through so many things to get over the mountaintop and finally win, I think there's potentially going to be less pressure on Boston this year than last year, now that they've won. And I also think the way that this summer went, between Jaylen Brown being mad about the Olympics, Jason Tatum then not playing much in the Olympics, I think there's the potential for some extra motivation there for some of these guys, especially those two guys, that wouldn't normally be there in a year after you win a title and break through. So I think things look awfully good for the Celtics. And as long as Kristaps Porzingis comes back from this, rare leg injury he had in the playoffs, okay, it's hard for me to pick against them at minimum coming out of the East. And I think you got to make him, as MacMahon, I think you said a bunch, the favorites to be winning another title back in June.
No, I mean, by the way, Tatum is logging some miles this offseason. So obviously the long regular season, then he did Team USA, which included Abu Dhabi and then France, obviously. He's in Shanghai now.
Well, he was back in his hometown of St. Louis, throwing out the first pitch with that hockey player he went to high school with.
Yeah, Matthew Tkachuk, yeah.
That guy.
And he's with Luka. Then he's with Luka in Shanghai for a Jordan Brand deal.
And he's got to go back to Abu Dhabi. Right. And he's got to go back. The Celtics and Nuggets are going to Abu Dhabi to open.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Forgot about that. So, open preseason, to be clear.
Open preseason. Sorry.
Yeah. No. But no, I mean, listen, this is a team that you can't make a case for everybody else as the favorite. You can make a case why other teams have a chance to win the championship, but you can't make a case for everybody else as the favorite after the Celtics win 64 games with a historic point differential and then cruise through the playoffs. Only losing, I think, 3 games in the playoffs. And look, Porzingis, again, whatever the estimate is on, I think the timetable had him coming back maybe around Christmas. I'll take
2025. He'll be back.
Yeah. So, let's say he misses the first 2.5 months of the season. I do think he will be cautious. He felt like he rushed back his last full year in Dallas and ended up looking bad because of that. And
by the way, the Celtics have like 5 centers on the roster, in part, I think, to let Al Horford take off a bunch of games, which he will, and to give Kristaps Porzingis as much time as humanly possible to get ready. Because again, all that matters for them is what happens from April to June. They're going to have a high seed. They're going to be ready to go. So they've got Luke Cornett. They've got Xavier Tillman. They've got guys who can eat plenty of minutes as they get through the season and give him time to get right.
And they won these by 14 games last year. And Xavier Tillman is a serviceable big man. But yeah.
We're also intrigued by Neemias Queta, who's a big guy. I think the first Portuguese NBA player, athletic, big, can rim run a little bit. He's going to get some minutes too this year.
Hey man, they just signed Lonnie Walker to a non-guaranteed contract, for crying out loud. Like they're still making additions.
My guess is Lonnie Walker won't be making the roster, but we will see. I think they'll be going into the season with 14 players.
By the way, as important as Porzingis was last year to them, and as well as he played for the Celtics, they went 11-2 in the playoffs without him.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Porzingis, and like this is the thing, everybody wanted to sort of evaluate Joel Embiid with the Olympic team. Joel Embiid was brought onto the Olympic team essentially for one game, which was the elimination game against Serbia, and he delivered.
To beat Serbia.
I guess both of those times, but only the one game that really mattered, and he played brilliantly. Was awesome down the stretch of that game. Kristaps Porzingis, while ideally you want him to be more around, games 1 and 2 of the finals, his performance in games 1 and 2 of the finals made it all worthwhile.
Listen, the game 1 was unforgettable as Bill Walton was being honored and everybody's wearing these, all the Celtics are wearing the Walton tie-dye warm-up shirts, and Porzingis is coming off the bench for the first time in forever. Remember, he makes that late, like everybody's out there warming up, and he came out of the tunnel late. Bontemps, you and I were doing hoop streams with Cass.
It's one of the coolest things I've ever been around. The way the crowd reacted to him coming out. It was, especially being in Boston, like that crowd's always awesome. I got chills just thinking about it. It was unbelievable.
It was so loud we couldn't hear each other, despite the fact we had the earpieces in. And so this injury-prone, 7-foot-plus guy serving as a sixth man to help the Celtics win a championship, that's what it was.
He's throwing in 30-footers.
It was amazing. It was just such an amazing thing. But yeah, they're by themselves.
That first quarter that he had in that game, the best quarter of his life, certainly the most memorable quarter of his life, that was worth the trade right there.
Is that going to make it into a certain book called Wonder Boy that a certain colleague of mine wrote that quarter?
Oh, absolutely. There'll be a little bit on that for sure. Porzingis gets some time in this book for sure.
I'm sure he does. Okay, so tier 2.
Pretty meaty tier. I'm curious to see, how many teams do you guys think are tier 2s?
I personally think there's 2.
2? Wow. Okay. I was going to say, I thought it could be as many as 6.
I think that the Knicks and Celtics. I think the Knicks and Sixers are in their own tier.
Okay.
I think I understand the argument, because I think you could go bigger, and I'll let you lay it out. But for me, I think the Knicks and Sixers, to me, are more talented rosters than some of these other teams. I think they fit better. And yes, there's obviously injury questions with Philly, but I think there's more overall questions with Milwaukee, and certainly with Cleveland, Orlando, and Indy. I could see the argument of putting them all in one tier together, but I would say it's those 2 teams in tier 2 or however you want to phrase it. And then I think those 4 teams, Milwaukee, Orlando, Indiana, and Cleveland, in whatever order you want to put them in, are in tier 3 together.
So I watched the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and I didn't see either the Knicks or the Sixers playing. Would be my concern with that tier ranking. But I hear what you're saying. They both made major additions in the offseason. All right.
I do want to talk about those 2 teams, but I'm just going to say that I really think the Bucks are being undervalued. I am not saying they should be the favorite. Giannis has been hurt in the playoffs, and Dame last year was, by his own admission, was out of his element. He openly has been saying that the transition was bigger than he thought. I think it's reasonable to think that pairing will work better.
Well, and Dame was going through a lot last year off the floor as well.
Also, just the transit. Yeah, beyond that, I can't quantify that. What I can quantify is he was asked to play completely differently than he'd played for a decade. More than that, because when he was at Weber State, You know, he played a certain way where he was not really basically the centerpiece of the team. And so, and then the injuries, Middleton, his whole situation being out for so long. And like, look, I'm not trying to compare Gary Trent to Mikal Bridges, but Gary Trent and Delon Wright are good rotation additions.
No, great minimum signings. I like the Taurean Prince signing. Look,
Taurean Prince.
If you want to argue Milwaukee is up there with those two teams, I totally get it. Because if they're all clicking, they have a ton of talent. There's no question about that. But there's just so many questions with them, right? Chris Middleton is a vitally important player for them. They look totally different when he plays.
Double ankle surgery.
A bunch of games. Right. He's coming off ankle surgery on both ankles. He's missed a ton of games the last couple of years. He was really good in the first round when they lost to Indiana, but he's got to be out there for them to be really good. And it's hard to bet on him being out there. You got Brook Lopez, who's an unexpiring contract and is in his mid-30s. Can he play at the same level again? They need him to do that. They have very little athleticism across the roster. They have very little perimeter defense across the roster. Obviously, DeLon Wright is a help there, but he's going to be coming off the bench. I just think they need to show me they should be in a higher tier before I can put them there personally.
So we're saying tier 2, then Wendy, you're the deciding vote. Do you go with the two teams, the Sixers?
I'm including the Bucks, but Bontemps is not. I mean, that's his opinion.
Then we're squeezing the Bucks in because I was thinking it was going to be more teams.
Let's talk about the Sixers and the Knicks here. They're on a little bit different timelines. The Knicks play is in chemistry, continuity, and flexibility. They have built a team that doesn't necessarily have to win it now. Obviously, they're going for it now, but they're young. They're going to be under contract. We'll see what happens with Julius Randle, but the rest of their core is going to be under contract. And this is a team built to withstand the new rules, which is largely because Jalen Brunson was willing to take this $150 million extension. I mean, it was way below his value. And so, and we're assuming that they're going to get Bridges on to extend as well. They are built with wings, which is what you need. They are built with reasonable contracts. They are built with depth, and they are built to potentially be flexible. Their
play is to take 5 years and try to win one of them.
Right. Exactly right. And there's one thing that I think you can say that the Knicks have done incredibly well under Leon Rose. They have found an identity and they have gotten players for their head coach.
100%.
They hired Tom Thibodeau, and then they said, we are going to give Tom Thibodeau style players. And it's so remarkable because it was the absolute inverse of what the Knicks have chased for years, which is short-term, marginal improvement, changing coaches, changing styles, saying that they're going to do something and then abandoning it, chasing the biggest stars, and usually losing out. It is the complete inverse of what they had done for a couple of decades. It is very impressive. You got to pay it off. And losing in the second round last year was not great. They technically didn't make any progression. Obviously, there's a bunch of circumstances with injuries, especially that factored in there, but they didn't technically progress last year. But I think that, they're putting down what I think they're basically saying is, put us in the second tier, but we're putting down roots up here.
Yeah. And what the Knicks have learned about themselves over the course of the last couple of years is that Leon Rose's godson is without question a face the franchise player for a damn good team. Right. Yes. And listen, Nobody thought Jalen Brunson was going to be that caliber. I think if when they got him, they thought, hey, we've got a guy I think they believed he was going to be a damn good starting point guard.
and a great leader for their team, but never thought he'd be this.
Yeah, and a good value on that contract that they were originally. I'm talking about the previous deal, 4 years before. They were originally criticized by a lot of people for overpaying, which in hindsight is absolutely hilarious. In their wildest imagination, Rick Brunson, Jalen's dad and his biggest fan, he wasn't telling anybody, hey, this guy's going to be an all NBA player. He's going to be on MVP ballots.
Right.
But that's who Brunson is. That's the caliber of player that he is, especially in that system, playing for Thibodeau with the trust, with the complimentary pieces that they've surrounded him with. And then to get him to take significantly less than market value is a massive, massive win for that franchise.
Yeah, and look, he's the reason why Mikal Bridges is there. They have the Villanova guys there. Like, he's the epicenter of all of it. And it's
DiVincenzo's there.
He's the reason why he's there. Remember, Dante DiVincenzo signed a sub-full mid-level deal last year, right? Like, that's one of the best contracts in the NBA. And he, all of that is because of Jalen Brunson. So yes, Leon Rose deserves a lot of credit. Tom Thibodeau deserves a lot of credit. The reason this is all happening is because of Jalen Brunson. And again, you said it perfectly, Brian. In today's NBA, you're talking about 1 to 3 year windows for teams. This isn't what it was a long time ago, and you could have a 10-year run with a team generally. There's going to be Oklahoma City maybe could do that. Maybe San Antonio could do that with Victor Wembanyama, but it's going to be very hard to have long-term sustainable success with the way rosters are going to start to turn over. The NBA wants to be more like the NFL. It's shifting in that direction. But the Knicks are betting that they can have this team together for 5 years. And if you look at the Celtics knocked on the door for 5-6 years and then had a year where everything broke right. They stayed healthy. A lot of teams didn't. They break through. They win the title, right? That's what the Knicks are betting on. That if we're a B+ to A- team for 5 years in a row, we're going to have a year where it all comes together and we're going to be able to win. And we'll see if they're right.
All right. So the Sixers, I think, even though Maxey is very young and Embiid is in his prime, I think their time pressure is a little bit more on them, if for nothing else than because of Paul George's age. I think
Joel's injury history. You can't walk away from that. He's a huge guy. He's had a ton of injuries, and we talk about Giannis being hurt in the playoffs. As Joel said repeatedly, he would like to have one healthy playoffs. He hasn't had one yet.
Right.
And he's 30. How long is his prime going to be? We don't know, but there's pressure to cash in while he's an MVP caliber player.
100%.
For sure. Yeah. And so, look, they had their move on Harden backfired, and they had to pivot, and it took them basically this year. Now, the year was affected dramatically by Joel's injury, but to sort of pivot to get their third player. Now they have him. And so now you got to go. So, I definitely think that they're in this tier. I think that they did a pretty good job considering what happens to teams, how they get hollowed out when they have to open up cap space, as we've seen that. I think that there's a decent chance if you give them another transaction year that Daryl Morey will be able to do some more. But the way they sort of backfilled the roster, they did a pretty good job. And of course, it helps that, you have an all-star level player in Maxey who was on a small cap hold to make that all happen. But they are equipped that if everything falls right, that they could do it this year. But they do need things to fall right, and they do need some help elsewhere in the conference. But there's no reason why they couldn't. You could certainly see them winning the East this year.
I don't agree that their move for Harden backfired. Just getting off of Ben Simmons' contract,
I guess,
was a win.
No, not I guess. Not I guess.
No, there's no I guess. The Brooklyn's move for Harden backfired.
Yeah,
Philly Philly got, Harden was at least productive while he was there, and then they were able to get a couple assets when they moved him while dumping Ben Simmons' albatross of a contract. So that's past tense anyways and not important to this discussion. I just want to clarify on and get
I mean, use whatever words you want for the Harden experience, but if you don't think backfired is the correct word, then you can nominate some other things.
Underwhelmed, sure.
Okay,
Backfired,
well,
no.
All right, fine.
Yeah,
well, I just want to get off the worst. Hey, aggregators, Wendy's wrong.
They got off the worst contract in the NBA, which turned out to be, and they got a guy who helped them win a bunch of games. Like they didn't win as much as they wanted to, and also making the trade when they did last summer, they made a very high stakes bet that they could cash in this summer with a star. I mean, Daryl Morey said the whole time, I'm not trading James Harden for mediocre stuff. I'm either getting a star back or I'm putting myself in position to get a star on the team. And there was one star this summer available, and they got him. And if they hadn't got him, who knows where they'd be. But it worked out for them.
And part of that bet was not extending Maxey last year and playing that out. And I don't know, did Maxey make money? Maybe he was going to be fun max regardless. But part of that bet was waiting on that. And, I don't think any of this happens, though. Bontemps, you've made this point many, many times. I don't think any of this happens unless Maxey proves himself as a bona fide, blossoming young star. And I don't know, maybe they would still get Paul George just because his options were limited in the way things played out with the Clippers. But Maxey sure put the Sixers in a position where they were very attractive for a variety of reasons.
I've said this before. If Tyrese Maxey isn't on the team or doesn't develop into this player, Joel Embiid's not on the team anymore. Like it is one of the most important things in the league the past few years that Tyrese Maxey hit, or that Mike Muscala hit that shot to give them the ability to get Tyrese Maxey in the draft, and that he has developed in the way that he has. Like it's remarkable. And yeah, look, they had as good a summer as they could have had. They get Paul George, which was a 0.001% outcome for them. They get Kelly Oubre back. They get Kyle Lowry back on a minimum. They get Andre Drummond. They get Eric Gordon. They get Caleb Martin. They have depth.
Caleb Martin was a nice pickup. They
get Caleb Martin. We'll see if Christian Yabusele can give him anything. He at least is somewhat intriguing after the way he played in the Olympics. I'm not super confident he's going to come back to the NBA and be significantly better than he was before, but we'll see. He might be. But they had a very good summer, and you can see if those three guys are healthy. I've said before, I think they're the best big three now in the league. They fit positionally. They got a ton of talent. They've got a ton of shooting now around Joel Embiid. They have put together in one cycle as good a roster as they realistically could have. And so now we'll see if they're healthy. We'll see what they can do. But I would personally have them ahead of Milwaukee and in this group with New York because I think they have more talent. I think Nick Nurse is a better coach. And I think they have more assets to add to this team over the course of the year. But again, if you want to argue Milwaukee's up there because of the strength of Giannis and Dame and what they have, I get it. I just think I need to see a little bit more of it after the way the last couple of years have gone.
All right. Well, anyway, before we go on, I just want to say, when they traded for Harden, Morey is hugging him on the tarmac. He's got a portrait of him in his house. There's Morey Harden 24 T-shirts on sale, and a year later he's calling him a liar. So.
Well, there's a difference between saying it was a smashing success and that it backfired. It didn't backfire because they got rid of Ben Simmons, which allowed them to do all this other stuff. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
The next tier
3.
Yeah, we've hit on. We mentioned Orlando and Indy, and you guys have rejected them from this tier. We've got.
I think they're in the third tier.
Reject them from the second tier.
I want to talk about the team in this tier that we sort of danced around, which is the Pacers.
We're not dancing. Speak.
Well, a couple of years ago, the Atlanta Hawks had missed the playoffs 3 straight years. They had a breakthrough run to the conference finals, aided in part by some, injuries and circumstantial luck in that run. Though they made it. Full credit to them, behind Trae Young playing great. And then they fell back, and I believe we're in the play-in each of the last 2 years and lost in the first round. I could see a very similar sequence of events happening with the Indiana Pacers.
Oh, spicy.
They were
Spicy
very
deep.
Look, Indiana. Do we think Indiana beats Milwaukee if Giannis is healthy? I would think we'd agree. No, we don't. Even though they succeeded against them in the regular season. If you want to say they beat them, I certainly don't think they beat the Knicks when it took them 7 games to beat a very injury depleted Knicks team.
Having said that, that was still a very, to go on to game set, regardless, to go in game 7. I know that Brunson broke his wrist or whatever.
Right. I mean, OG played 5 minutes. Jalen Brunson broke his hand. Julius Randle didn't play. They were down half their team. I mean,
I know, but like,
I'm not trying to minimize them making the conference finals and winning that game, but it's worth pointing out.
Yeah.
They needed a lot of things to go their way to get to that point. And I really did not like their summer very much. Like I think Andrew Nembhard had a nice season, and I think they got him on a good contract. I really did not like the Obi Toppin contract. I did not understand that. Like, there was a lot of value to be had in that sort of range of player this summer. Obi Toppin's a backup power forward who can't play center, who's an okay shooter, but like, yes, he fits with their system.
Yes, he fits with what they do.
They paid him over the mid-level and a team that isn't going to spend into the tax. So again, like, there's a finite amount of money for them to spend.
Yeah, but I don't think their track toward being a contender is built on the back of an Obi Toppin contract.
Well, it is if they only have limited amount of money to spend. And for example, they have barely any defensive players on the roster, and they could have used that money. Like, say they went and got Derek Jones with that money, a guy who could play the 3 and 4, who's super athletic, who could run in transition for them, who could guard on the perimeter. Like, I think that would have been a way better use of that money than signing Obi Toppin, who is a guaranteed 8th or 9th guy on your team. Like, I just felt like they hit a single and like, hey, we're going to keep this team together and it's going to be great. When if you looked at it realistically, they had a great year. And obviously I've talked a lot about, I mean, MacMahon mentioned earlier, Tyrese Halliburton, the first half of the year, was a top 5 player in the league. He was playing great. I want to see him healthy this year and see if he can get back to that level again. But I just think they really could have taken some real steps forward. Instead, they kind of treaded water. And we talk about how good these teams are around them in the East. I think it's going to be hard for them to break into the top half.
Well, if you go on Carlisle's recent track record, they'll win another playoff series in 2036.
Oh, man.
I'm just kidding. No, to me, like the reason to believe in the biggest reason to believe in the Pacers is because Tyrese Halliburton is a young ascending superstar. And I know he barely played for Team USA, and like he wasn't nearly the same player after the injury last year. But man, based on what we saw and the system that Rick has installed to maximize this guy's talents, like, dude, they're going to be a top 3 offensive team. And so, you know, that right there is the reason to believe in them. And again, I think Siakam, I thought he hit the ground running pretty well, but should be better and more comfortable this year. I don't know that I agree that if I'm putting bets down, I'm not betting on them getting back into the Eastern Conference Finals, but I wouldn't just assume that they're going to be a one and done playoff team.
Well, here's what I'd say. We just praised a minute ago having the Knicks for creating an identity and getting their coach players that play the way he wants to play. That's what the Pacers are doing.
Yeah.
Pacers have created an identity, and they have routinely got players who will play alongside each other within that identity, the way the head coach, who has a big influence on their moves as well. Ray Carlisle has a big voice in the front office. That's what they're doing. Now, whether or not it hits where they need to go, I mean, this is sort of the thing, but that sort of the story of the Pacers on and off for the last 30 years is they get teams that are very good, but they're not great, and they get blocked by things out. And, I still think that they could use another impact player. I don't know how they're going to get that player, but they created Siakam out of creativity and circumstance. That was a real shrewd maneuver to get Siakam.
Well, and give them credit for throwing a bag at Bruce Brown.
Yeah, they created it.
Hey, that's if they're going to be able to pull off a blockbuster trade, that contract was going to be part of it. So that was planning, that was plotting, and then that was pouncing on the opportunity. And they were, they tried to get Siakam going back to at least last summer. So they were well planned and persistent there. And look, the one thing I'll say, especially in a market like Indiana, like we talk about everything like it's Tyler or bust. Listen, if the Pacers are a fun, consistent playoff team that never breaks through, there is nothing wrong with that.
I agree.
No, for sure.
There's been some great springs in Indiana with teams that are fun to watch. They've been, great for different reasons, but I do think the biggest key to this season is Halliburton's health.
Yeah.
You don't have to put out an injury report in the Olympics, but Tyrese was bothered by another leg injury at the Olympics.
Right.
I'm told he had an MRI there. It wasn't enough to like totally sideline him. I mean, he was out there, he was available for the games, but and I don't think it'll like hold him back and start the season or anything. But again, it's another leg injury. So it's just you just hope that he's going to be okay. Because obviously him playing at high speed is the nature of his game. Okay, so the other teams that we have in this tier, we've got the Magic. Let me just say that I don't think enough attention is paid to Paolo Banchero. Paolo Banchero won Rookie of the Year 2 years ago. He has missed a total of, I think, 14 games in his first 2 seasons, so he's been healthy.
I don't know how many. All-Star game in his second year, didn't he?
Yeah, and he made the All-Star game in his second year. He averaged 23 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists last year. His 3-point shooting has improved. He gets to the foul line. His overall flexibility and ability to play multiple positions is impressive. We've seen him play point guard. We've seen him play center. Great size. That's a guy, who never gets mentioned among the young stars in the league. And why not? Now, he's not an athletic freak. He's not a guy that you say in the classic vein of a guy who can take over a game. And if you want to argue that his ceiling may not be like the ceiling of some of these other guys, like an Ann Edwards, that's certainly a fair argument. But Banchero is on an absolute gigantic upward trajectory. Like, I don't know if you would say he's a future superstar and if that's your criticism, but like, so often we see guys have huge third years. Why wouldn't we expect Banchero to be a contender to be on the All-NBA team this season? And if he is, the Magic are going to be in great shape.
I feel like you're making an argument that doesn't really exist. I mean, I think if anything, he's been maybe given too much credit so far because he's been.
I don't think there's anybody involved with the Magic who's gotten too much credit.
Well, I mean, that's true. But I mean, he did make the All-Star team in his second year. And look, the question for Paolo is very simple. He's been one of the most inefficient players in the NBA his first 2 years in the league. Now, he's a super young player on a team without a lot of shooting. And that he certainly is a guy who, if he's playing with more space on the court, you would like to think his efficiency will improve. But he's been, even last year, his 3-point shooting went from just under 30% to 33%, which is an improvement, but still is not great, right? So, like, he needs to become a way
I'm not
more...
sure I agree he's inefficient. He gets to the line 7 times a game.
No. I'm looking at his numbers. He did improve his efficiency last year. Effective field goal percentage from 46.5 to 49.7. I
mean, he's under 50% effective field goal. Like, that's not efficient.
True shooting percentage from 52.9 to 54.6, which is still under league average, but young player.
He's a super young guy. It's okay. Yeah. But like, that's the thing that's going to determine his ceiling. Can he become a very efficient player over time? That's the thing that's going to determine whether he's a somewhere in like the
he
Julius
could
Randle.
He could lower his turnovers. He does turn the ball over more.
Yeah, he turns the ball over. He's not a great outside shooter. He takes pretty tough, hard shots. Like, look,
their whole team could improve efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, look, Franz Wagner didn't hit any threes last year. He's got to get back to being the player he was from a shooting perspective that he was a couple of years ago, and he was a mid to high 30% three-point shooter instead of a guy who shot 29% and really struggled to shoot the ball against the Cavs in the playoffs. Like, they've got to get better as a group. They're super young. There's a lot of reasons for optimism there. But when you're talking about his overall ceiling, like, there's a path where he's like Julius Randle, right? Who's made 2 All-NBA teams, who's made multiple All-Star teams, who's a really good player, but is a guy that, is difficult to build around from like a championship level standpoint because he is not super efficient. He needs to have the ball in his hands a lot. Or does he become a guy who's a, top 10-ish player in the league? And if he does that, it's because he becomes a high 30% three-point shooter and he is a lot more efficient. And then he is this 6'10" guy who is efficient with the shot, can create shots for other players, can do a lot of different things. But yeah, I mean, he's really good. And, that's it. There's a lot to be excited about with him.
And they improve the circumstances. Getting KCP, it makes a great defensive team better, but this is a team that you got to put spacing around Banchero to give him a chance. Ideally, you can make him your second playmaker, allow him to be more of a finisher than a creator, a secondary creator. They're not there yet. I don't know that Suggs is going to develop to that point, but Suggs made a major jump last year as a three-point shooter as well. Didn't hold up, I don't think, come playoff time. But improving the spacing gives Paolo a chance to continue developing to being a more efficient player.
And it's now time for Cavs Corner with Brian Windhorst.
All right. We have talked about the Cavs quite a bit on this pod. I don't think there's a lot more that we can say other than there's going to be 2 things to watch coming out of this. Actually, I think 3 things to watch for the Cavs. One, does Darius Garland have a bounce back year?
Yep.
He's had some super weird injuries over the last couple of years. He got his eye socket broken 2 years ago. Last year, he gets his jaw broken, gets it wired shut, can't eat for like a month or whatever, or 6 weeks, whatever it was, and he lost weight. So in addition to learning to play alongside Donovan Mitchell, he's had just crazy injuries. There was some rumblings out there that there might be a trade there. Long story short, the Cavs, I think, made it known that even if there was a trade demand, they weren't going to honor it. He's under contract for 3 more years, I believe, and so it might even be 4 more years. It's a long time. There's no out. The Cavs are basically like, you can ask for the demand, but we're not trading them. And so there was no demand. Now they've all sung Kumbaya, and Donovan's like, oh, he's going to be great with me, and Darius is like, love Donovan, blah, blah, or hugging. But there was a time there where that wasn't sure. So how he bounces back this year is big. And then obviously how Evan Mobley changes his game. We just, some footage recently leaked out of Mobley's offseason workouts. I didn't maybe see all of it. I didn't see him knocking down 100 threes in the workout. Maybe that is happening. I don't know. I'm not there. But seeing Evan Mobley do an up and under and dunking is not, I know he can do that. He's one of the best dunkers in the league.
I don't care about off-season workout footage.
I know. I'm just saying, like, if there was a video of him, time-lapse photography of him shooting 70% on catch and shoot threes, standing alone in a gym, that would be a nice thing. And that comes down to the third thing, which is how Kenny Atkinson affects the way Evan Mobley plays and the way Darius Garland plays. I was pretty strongly against the Cavs bringing this core 4 back in their form. I thought that there was no way they could do it. However, I have seen coaches put new systems in place that have worked. And one of the things that I've learned in covering the NBA for a couple of decades is not to assume certain alignments can't work with different systems or philosophies. So I will afford Kenny Atkinson and the Cavs to do that. But if the Cavs are going to advance into that second tier, which I'm sure the Cavs organization would say we should be in tier 2, we're the 4th seed 2 years in a row. We made it to the second round last year. How could you not put us in tier 2? If they're going to actually truly advance there, then there's got to be that improvement. I think that everybody would have to agree with that.
Yeah. MacMahon said it best. If they really were in the second tier, they wouldn't have fired their coach.
Yeah.
That's true.
Not exactly a vote of confidence that the thing was moving in the right direction. And again, if this was 1998 and they're playing that style, it'd be a totally different deal. But it's just they're trying to win with a style that is outdated unless Mobley develops into just an average.
Well, look, that doesn't 100% have to be true. Mm-hmm. Like if you made him like a playmaker where he would get the ball in the elbow and like go to work, and I mean, like saying this name is insane. I agree, it's insane. But if you put him in a situation like you did with Jokic, where he gets the ball and then people operate around him, you don't necessarily have to be a volume 3-point shooter. But so I'm not saying that has to be the way it's to go. There are other ways to do it, but obviously that's the most reasonable path forward. I give you that.
He's got to become, like I've said before, in my opinion, for them to be a championship level team, he's got to become their best player. And that's with Donovan Mitchell on the team. So he's got to make significant strides. They hired Kenny Atkinson to change the way they play, to develop Evan Mobley, to develop Darius Garland. We'll see if he does it. Like that, like you said, that's the whole story of the Cavs season. It's what's going to make them interesting to watch. I think as far as tier 4 goes, the question really is it just the Miami Heat, or do you put the Atlanta Hawks with the Miami Heat? I would argue, for the same reason that you were asking MacMahon, do you maybe put the Heat in tier 3? I would put the Heat in tier 4, because we're either going to find out this year that the Heat are definitely a consistent play-in team and they don't have a higher ceiling and they do have to move on from this chapter of this team, or Jimmy Butler powers them into the top 6 or maybe higher than that, and they're healthy and they're good and they look like a team that can make a run in the East playoffs. And then you maybe think that this run could extend a little longer. To me, it's an either or thing, and I got to see him do it. And I think because we think they at least could do it, they've got higher upside than the couple teams that I think are probably in the tier behind them.
Yeah, no, I think you got to leave them in this tier because you don't think it's likely, but you think it's possible that they can make a deep playoff run, right? And you don't think it's possible that the Hawks can make a deep playoff run. I know they did a few years ago, but you do not think it's possible that these Atlanta Hawks are getting out of the first. Honestly, I would be shocked if they get out of the play-in. So with the Heat, you at least could see, hey, you don't want to necessarily match up with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Eric Spoelstra in the first round of the playoffs.
Well, in theory, if you're looking at the Hawks, you're going to say, well, let's see how the number 1 overall player in the draft, Zachary Richichet, looks this year. Is that a guy? Now, granted, this is not a draft that was out of excitement. That said, he is a teenager.
Yeah.
Is this a guy?
I don't anticipate him immediately walking in and having a massive impact.
I agree. I'm not saying it either. He's like, I think 4th, we said, on the odds for Rookie of the Year. I'm not expecting that either, but let's just see what he looks like, number 1. Number 2, they are primed to make 1 or 2 significant trades if you look at their roster. So they have Clint Capella, who's been very available, and I'm not saying they're going to trade Clint Capella for a star, but that's a salary.
They need to get value for Capella because they've got 2 other quality bigs on the roster.
So they've got Capella. Bogdan Bogdanovic is a guy who could potentially be moved in a trade, I think. DeAndre Hunter is a guy who could potentially be moved in a trade. They may end up keeping.
They'd love to move DeAndre Hunter in a trade. Okay. That's only going to be able to.
Yeah,
right. They have this Laker pick. Let's see what happens with that. And the other thing I'm going to say to keep an eye on for them, Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson is one of the best athletes in the league.
Yeah.
Now they got to get him into a contract. It doesn't look like it's going to be. This is a guy who I think in a different, 3 years ago might get the fun max.
I don't know about that. I mean, he had a really nice year last year, but he basically didn't play his first 2 years, and he had a nice year, but he wasn't anywhere near that level.
Okay, this is a big time prospect, one of the more exciting young prospects in the Eastern Conference. He's
a really interesting player for sure.
I would say he's probably, if you had to rank untouchable players on their roster, he'd rank number one, even above Ricochet. Okay. So like, and you're right, Bontemps, he hasn't played that much, but like, that also means that we haven't all seen the growth there. So if you're watching the Hawks this year, I think you're saying, where's Jalen Johnson? Where's Ricochet? Obviously we've talked about Trae Young and how he's got an interesting season coming up. But Jalen Johnson is a guy that if you're going to go to a Hawks game, I know that when I saw the Hawks play live last year, even having watched him on TV, his athleticism, I always talk about Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin, I obviously saw perform at Oklahoma. I was obviously aware this guy was a mega athlete. When I went to Summer League and saw this guy play, I was like, whoa.
And weren't you there when he dunked on Reeves? When that dunk? Weren't you in the building that night?
Was it?
It was in LA.
When he jumped over Reeves.
Yeah. And Dan Wiki with the LA Times asked Reeves about it. And Reeves is like, man, everybody saw what happened.
Yeah, I know. That's right. And I was there that night.
Wiki's like, well, we something like we want your perspective.
Yeah.
You didn't want my perspective on that one.
Yeah, Jalen's certainly a very intriguing player. I think the only question here really to me is, we got the Heat in tier 4, we got the Hawks in tier 5. I would argue there should be a second team in tier 5, which is the Toronto Raptors, who are in sort of a similar spot.
I was going to say a third team because I think the Bulls are still there.
Well, that's really the debate is, do you have the Raptors and Bulls with the Hawks in one tier? I would say it's the Hawks and the Raptors and then a gap, because to me, the Bulls moving on from DeMar DeRozan, moving on from Alex Caruso, their two best players last year, they're going to be bad.
So I think the Bulls need to be bad. The Hawks, the Hawks don't benefit from being bad. And by the way, people in San Antonio are going to be keeping a close eye on those situations. That Bulls pick is top 10 protected, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. Yeah.
Okay. The Hawks pick's unprotected.
Yeah. I just think you look at Toronto, signing Emmanuel quickly, signing Scotty Barnes to the max. They have RJ Barrett. Like they have Jakob Poeltl. They have a team that they're in, to me, the same kind of boat as Atlanta, where they're not bad enough, certainly, to be fighting for lottery positioning. And they're going to
have a hard time finishing below some of these teams in their own conference.
I think they're going to have a hard time finishing below 10th. And that's what, to me, Atlanta and Toronto are in the same boat, where they've got intriguing young players. They have some questions about their long-term future, but they're probably going to be the two teams playing in the 9-10 game in the East. Whereas I think Chicago's going to be bad. And I think everybody else after Chicago is definitely going to be bad and fighting
Chicago will be bad. Everybody else will be abysmal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only question to me is whether you have Chicago in their own tier and then the other four, Charlotte, Detroit, Brooklyn, and Washington together, or if you say they're all in one group because their goal is all the same, which is to be fighting for as many ping pong balls as they can, even though some are going to be worse.
Are we giving Charlotte any chance to be a play-in?
I mean, that goes back to the LaMelo thing, right? If LaMelo gets back to where he was as a second-year player, maybe.
They gave Miles Bridges a 3-year, $75 million contract. They obviously believe he is going to rebound even more than from him being away. And Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball are very talented players. I mean,
I predict they're going to be heavily in the mix for ping pong balls this year.
Yeah, I can see them in mid-season.
I think a year from now is when the question about does Charlotte start to take a step forward really happen.
That's probably the way to go. So then you get down to the bottom tier, which is the tankers, which is Washington, who is blatantly tanking, Brooklyn, who made
blatantly tanking.
Brooklyn
made the trades to tank.
Yes.
Detroit,
and you could easily see them trade Nick Claxton even during the year. They signed him to a deal this summer. It's a descending deal. Like that to me definitely is on
I
the
think
board.
everybody on that roster pretty much could be available.
There's nobody I would say nobody's untouchable.
They have Bojan Bogdanovic in that roster. He had 2 off-season surgeries, but if he demonstrates that he's be able to play again, he'll be for sale.
Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith,
sure.
Dennis Schroeder, all these guys
I think are going
to be available. Yeah, all these guys are going to be available.
Yes. Okay. So Washington, the free agent signings that they made, like 5 minutes after they made them, people were like, oh, they might just have signed them to trade them. Like, people are already speculating that the Lakers could try to get Valanciunas at midseason. Like, the ink wasn't even dry on Valanciunas' contract.
Look, the Wizards clearly pivoted to being bad last year, and everything they've done since then is geared in that direction. They draft Alex Sarr. He's going to be a guy who needs time to play and develop. Bub Carrington, really interesting young player, had showed some really interesting stuff at Summer League from Pitt. He's going to play a lot. He's going to be a young point guard with the ball in his hands a lot. Bilal Coulibaly, another young guy is going to play a lot. Like, they traded Denny Avdia, who's their best player last year. Like,
didn't re-sign Tyus Jones when he they easily could have. So
in part to clear time for Bub Carrington to be their point guard.
Right. To lose. One of the easiest ways to lose in the NBA is to have young guards. That's
100%.
like guaranteed.
The Wizards are basically at least a full year ahead of the Bulls in the sense of they were teams that were stuck in
the Bulls still have a couple. Like, here's the thing about the Bulls. For your fantasy teams out there, Josh Giddey might sniff averaging a triple-double this year. Zach LaVine they're highly incentivized for him to play well. Zach LaVine's going to be firing shots in there. They're not going to win many games, but those guys are going to put up numbers.
You know who's the interesting guy to watch to me in Chicago? Is Kobe White. Kobe White had an awesome year last year. Made a massive leap. Signed a 3-year deal for in the mid-30s. Took a massive leap forward. And now they trade for Josh Giddey. He's clearly going to be their guy going forward as a point guard. I think it's safe. They traded for him as a bet on Josh Giddey. And Kobe White sitting there making 12 and then 12-8 the next 2 years, and then he's a free agent. There's no realistic way he gets extended on that contract. So he's going to get to free agency. Going to be an interesting situation to watch there, I think, over the next couple of years, because you're a rebuilding team. Yes, Kobe White's a young guy, but for a Bulls team with no assets, really, going forward draft-wise, you mentioned MacMahon, they've got lottery-protected picks out there, right? Like, be interesting to see if they if they pivot. Like, Kobe White's a guy who could get them a lot of stuff in a trade. So I'm very curious to see what happens there. But yeah, they are just at the beginning of this because they are 2 years late on pivoting this way.
And we talked about Detroit on a recent pod.
Let's not.
They're in the bottom. All right. That's the Eastern Conference tiers. We'll be back later in September with Western Conference tiers. Thank you to our producer, Jackson. Thank you to Bontemps and MacMahon. Thank you for watching and listening to the Hoop Collective. We will talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos.